Hello, this is World Business Report from the BBC World Service, where we bring you the latest in money, marketing, manufacturing, and yes, much, much more. Please review us, rate us, share us wherever you can. BBC podcasts are supported by advertising.
You're ready to get back into yoga, so you ordered the essentials, a non-slip mat, yoga blocks to keep balance, and an exercise ball. And you used your Bank of America customized cash rewards credit card, choosing to earn 3% cash back on online shopping and up to 5.25% as a preferred rewards member, which you put towards your most essential yoga gear, noise-canceling headphones. Apply for yours at bankofamerica.com/more rewarding. Copyright 2021 Bank of America Corporation.
Hello, this is World Business Report from the BBC World Service. I'm Rob Young. Welcome to the programme. Some of the world's largest vehicle makers are showing off their latest models at the first big car show since the pandemic struck. We will hear what is new and what is worrying industry executives. Also, over the next half an hour, the ongoing coronavirus restrictions in Kenya and the impact the pandemic is having on some of that country's poorest people.
They say there's a silver lining in every cloud, and nobody knew that, there are some positive things that, would come out of the pandemic.
And later on, the push to get British companies to improve their diversity and hire more young black people. All sorts of industries have had a hard time of it since the pandemic hit. Car makers have faced a number of challenges. Not only did sales collapse as economies shut down, but manufacturers have since struggled to get hold of the microchips, which are so vital to modern vehicles as sales recovered. All of this as the industry rapidly develops electric vehicles as a growing number of nations set dates to phase out the sale of new petrol and diesel cars. For the first time since the pandemic started, a major motor show has got underway in Munich, in Germany, where all of these issues are being discussed, and the BBC's Theo Leggett is there. What is the mood among executives in Munich?
A profound sense of relief that the motor show as it is back, that not only has it managed to overcome the COVID pandemic, and this is a gathering, remember, of thousands of people, many of them from a long way away, but also that the motor show itself has survived, because even before the COVID pandemic, there were problems with this kind of trade fair, and the show in Frankfurt collapsed under the weight of its own costs and unwieldiness, if you like. It had distinctly gone out of fashion. So this was always going to be an attempt to try and reinvent the motor show. That they did it at a time of COVID is quite remarkable. And there are relatively few car companies here at the moment, but those that are very, very definitely glad to be here.
And are there any new petrol or diesel cars being launched at the event this year, or is it all about electric?
I think the words petrol and diesel are almost dirty words at this show. The organisers, who are the Federation of German Automobile Industry, have made it clear that this is a show about mobility and climate neutrality, and petrol and diesel doesn't really fit into that at all. So all the talk has been about when car companies are going to phase out petrol and diesel and the electric models that are going to replace them. And all the car launches I've seen, they're electric models. There have been several new electric models brought onto the market by Mercedes, for example, also by Renault, and we've had some far-thinking, blue-sky-thinking concepts from BMW and from Volkswagen as well. So, yeah, the emphasis is very much on electrification and on automation as well. People are still talking about self-driving cars and the progress that's been made there.
Yes, there's been talk about self-driving cars for an awful long time, hasn't there? You mentioned this word mobility just before. Just explain what it is and why car makers are betting the house on it.
OK, well, mobility is about getting around. Climate neutral mobility is about doing it without emitting any carbon dioxide. And I think it's for that reason that the organisers here have filled up one of the vast halls with a very, very large selection of bicycles, probably the largest selection of bicycles put in one place at any one time for an awful long time. The idea is to encourage people to think about cars as being part of an overall picture of mobility in the future. So if you have a car, it'll be an electric car. But you might not have a car. You might have an electric scooter. It might be a hydrogen-powered scooter. Or it might be some kind of electrically assisted bicycle. Or it could be something else entirely, some flight of fancy from a wacky inventor's mind that will get you from A to B. I saw an electric taxi, an electric flying taxi outside one of the halls earlier on today. There are no limits. And a large section of road outside the conference centre here, linking it with the centre of town, has been set aside so that members of the public can come and try these things. And public squares have been set aside as well. So they're trying to create a sort of festival of mobility rather than a conventional motor show, which, as I said, has kind of gone out of date now.
An electrical flying taxi certainly does stand out, but what about something that's intended to stay on the ground or on the road?
Well, Rob, one thing that I have been looking at is a new concept car from BMW. It's called the iVision Circular. Sounds like a kind of weird name, doesn't it? But circular is about the circular economy. It's about recycling. And the idea behind this car is that every single part of it is A, made from recycled materials where possible, and B, that the entire car itself can be recycled, as Daniela Berlinger, the head of sustainability design at BMW, explained to me.
So what we actually did, we envision a future where we can use up onto 100% recycled materials. And not only recycled materials, but also materials which were already in the cycle. So, for example, what you see here is we're going to think of recycled plastic in a way that when you use it normally, you have no marks. It has to be perfect. But what we envision is that every piece is unique, and you can use every piece which is falling out of the production within the car.
So it's very different from what we're used to. And the inside of the car as well involves recycled materials, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So what you see here is the idea of having a small footprint but a high luxury interior. And the interior, how we envision it, is only made out of a few materials. So what you see here, the textile is done out of old textiles we got back from our own cars. We reclaimed them, we recycled them, and we made new textile out of it. Every part you see here is dispatchable, so nothing is glued together. Circular economy for us also means that it's easy to dismantle.
That was Daniela Berlinger there from BMW. Now, Thea, one of the big issues that the industry is facing is this shortage of semiconductors. What are car makers saying about how long this shortage may well last and how they're coping with it?
Well, they're being very open about the fact that they don't really know how long it's going to last. A few weeks ago, they might have said it'll be finished by the end of the year. It's quite apparent that because of a resurgence in COVID in Malaysia, for example, and problems at factories elsewhere in the world, that isn't going to happen. I spoke to the chief executive of Daimler-Benz, the owner of Mercedes, earlier on, and he said it could well go on into 2023 now. People simply don't know. So the emphasis now is on making sure that they're using the supplies they have as efficiently as possible. They're acknowledging that there will be disruptions to production in the next few months. That's unavoidable. That's going to hit their income as well. But they're now planning the long term as well and looking at what can be done to their supply chains to make them more resilient. And I also spoke to the head of Bosch, which is one of the biggest suppliers in the auto industry. They've just set up a factory in Dresden to make semiconductors because they realized some 3 years ago that the demand for semiconductors, for computer chips, was just going to go up and up because cars are becoming more and more computerized. So they say they're ready. That plant isn't at full production yet. It won't be for a while, but at least it's there.
So there may be relief among executives that they have finally got a motor show up and running, but the headaches of the pandemic continue.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they've gone past one point in the pandemic. They're able to sell cars again now. Dealerships are open and factories most of the time are open. There's a profound sense of relief at that. And they say that demand for cars is actually sky high at the moment. That's why the problems with the semiconductor supplies are so serious for them at the moment, because they want to build cars as quickly as they can. The problem is they can't.
That was the BBC's Theo Leggett there in Munich in Germany. Still to come on World Business Report, the ongoing impact of the pandemic on Kenya's poorest and a campaign to get British businesses to hire many more young black men and women. Well, let's have a look at some of the other business and economic stories around today with Susanna Streeter from the brokers Hargreaves Lansdown. Hi, Susanna.
Hi there, Rob.
So yet another financial watchdog has issued a warning about cryptocurrencies. Why are regulators increasingly worried, it seems, about the role of the likes of Bitcoin?
Well, yes, this latest warning has come from the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the UK's financial watchdog. And it's pretty unusual, in fact, to hear the chair of the FCA dedicate a chunk of speech to talk about a reality TV star. But Kim Kardashian came up in the speech because the chair said he's very concerned about the level of financial promotion of crypto assets on social media, and she's been involved in that. Now, the watchdog is clearly very worried about the lack of controls implemented by major social media platforms and has urged them to crack down on posts which aren't clearly identified as promotions. It's really worried about the situation and reckons actually, in fact, that legislation may be the only answer, highlighting that current legislation, which is being put before Parliament, just won't go far enough. So certainly a fresh warning from the Financial Conduct Authority.
Indeed, I'm sure the issue of cryptocurrency regulation is something we will return to on World Business Report. Now, let's talk about aluminium prices. They've hit their highest level in a decade, and this is being blamed on the coup in Guinea. What's the link?
Well, yes, as you say, the prices of the metal used in beer cans, construction and cars. We've heard about the semiconductor chip shortage. Now it appears perhaps aluminium might be in short supply. Shares of aluminium producers in China and Europe have risen, but some have fallen, particularly Rio Tinto. Now, Rio Tinto owns a 45% share in a company that mines aluminium, well, actually bauxite, the ore needed to make aluminium in Guinea. And Guinea soldiers said on Sunday they'd overthrown the president in an apparent military coup. So there are real concerns about the supply of this ore needed to make this really, really valuable commodity. Rio Tinto has recovered a little bit in the last hour or so, but was down around 1%.
OK, Susanna Streeter from Hargreaves Lansdowne, thank you. You're with World Business Report on the BBC World Service. While many nations have eased their pandemic-era restrictions, Kenya recently extended its coronavirus rules. The number of COVID-19 cases in the country has been relatively low by international standards, but there has been a huge economic impact on many Kenyans. The BBC's Vivian Nunes is in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi.
Like much of sub-Saharan Africa, the official numbers here in Kenya suggest the country has escaped the worst of the coronavirus. Even so, there are around 700 new cases reported every day, and there have been nearly 5,000 COVID deaths since the outbreak began. In the early stages of the pandemic, strict lockdowns were put in place, and there is still an overnight curfew. The economic impact of those measures has been enormous, especially on the millions of workers who make up Kenya's informal economy. Street vendors, house cleaners, restaurant staff and others suddenly found themselves sent home from work, often with zero financial support. The situation for many was dire. I caught up with the BBC's Michael Kaloki, who's in Kibera, Nairobi's densely packed informal settlement of only a few square kilometres that an estimated 250,000 people call home. And he showed me around.
Okay, so Kibera is Kenya's largest informal settlement. A lot of people came here hoping to find work. Rent is cheap here, and people from rural areas coming here looking for work in the city. But, Kibera does have its challenges as well, and one of them is that there is people living in extreme poverty here. And the infrastructure here is not very well set up. Sanitation is a challenge. No water, running water in many areas, and people have to go sometimes long distances to fetch water.
Because of the economic hit that happened during the pandemic, I wonder, how did that play out here in Kibera?
Well, it should say the economic situation even before the pandemic was a challenge for many. A lot of people making less than $1 a day. Now the pandemic really just made things that much worse. Here in Kibera, there are maybe I'd say hundreds of people who are working out in the factories within the city, in hotels as well, working in people's homes. And many of those lost their jobs.
One of those people who has faced many of those challenges you've mentioned over the past year is Josephine Muchilu. Let's go and see how she's getting on now. Josephine lives in a one-room house with plastic sacking on mud walls and a corrugated tin roof. A curtain divides the space in two. In the back of the house, there's a bed where Josephine sleeps with her two younger children. The older two sleep on a mattress in the front. Like so many Kenyans, Josephine lost her job in the early days of the pandemic.
So before the coronavirus, I used to be a cook in a certain school. Okay. Then when corona came, the schools were closed down.
It was demolished to make way for a new railway line, leaving Josephine without a job when schools reopened. She was able to open a small fruit and vegetable stand, a kiosk, but with so many of her neighbours in Kibera also losing their jobs, Josephine found few customers.
The people were there, but they didn't have the incomes. So eventually my business ran down, now it was closed.
So what can Josephine do? Well, ever resourceful, she underwent a tailoring course with the hope of one day owning her own clothing business. How did you come up with that idea? How did you decide to try seamstress training?
My kids' uniforms used to torn. Now I take it to the tailor. It is too expensive. Even myself, it is too expensive to make a garment. Now I sat down and said, no, I should know how to make the clothes instead of giving so huge money to the tailors to make for me the clothes.
Josephine is one of many Kenyans who found themselves quickly needing an alternative income stream in March 2020. Finding a way to earn money through a small business venture is part of life for millions of people here and across Africa. And for many, that has meant migrating from the rural areas to the big city. In Kenya, there's been a perception at least that moving to Nairobi will bring the kind of economic opportunity that just isn't possible in the countryside. But that belief is starting to change, and some of those who found themselves forced out of the city when the pandemic struck have realised there just might be another way to make a living that doesn't involve mass migration to urban centres. Meet Farmer Jack.
I'm Jacob Uguro Nyango from Nyakach in Kisumu County. I used to be in Nairobi and I worked as a panel beater. I moved back home in 2020 July. There was nowhere to get money even to pay rent and to feed myself and my young family at home. So I started just some farming in these indigenous veggies and tomatoes. Right now I'm harvesting most of the veggies, so I'm good. The money I'm getting from what I'm doing now compared to what I was doing is unmatched. What I'm getting now is much more. Is much more compared to what I used to work for in Nairobi. My eldest daughter is 16 years old. I used to see them once a year. In fact, Corona has been a blessing to me.
COVID-19 caught everybody by surprise.
Chris Makolu is the Africa Director for the International Development Organisation, World Neighbours.
Most of the people were laid off because they live from hand to mouth. Most of them were not able to, first, pay the rent, and secondly, feed themselves. Most of them have their families, in the rural areas. So they normally send them money. So they couldn't feed themselves, they couldn't pay rent, they couldn't, send money to their families. So some of them, quite a number, migrated from cities back to their rural areas.
And as Chris says, the countryside has been a lifeline for many.
They had to move back to the villages, and when they reached there, those who had some skills tried to find if they could get jobs. But again, because the economy was really negatively affected, it was very difficult to begin to practice their job or to get employed. Food was a very, very important thing because certain areas in Kenya are food insecure. So they're relying on some vegetables, some fresh vegetables, tomatoes, to come from other countries. But because the government had put a ban on transportation, people began to think how they can survive. And then they realized that they could even grow some of these things for themselves, if not for sale. So some of them, began to support their families to do that, and also to grow a little bit more that neighbors could actually come and buy.
So have things changed for the better in some areas? Has COVID-19 essentially revived some rural economies?
Reverse migration has changed, or is beginning to change, the local development of the rural areas. It was known initially that for you to get a job, you must go, salaried job, or to get money, you must migrate to the city. But they're beginning to realize that they can actually make ends meet without necessarily coming to big cities, but working from their homes.
Do you think there's a bit of a myth about people in Kenya? They see this myth surrounding Nairobi. They're going to make it big, they're going to earn lots of money, or at least have a better life than they would have had in the village, in the countryside. Do you think that's changing now? People can see that they can have a life in these areas.
This is the second phenomenon in Kenya that has made people to think or to reevaluate that myth about everything being rosy in the city. During the post-election violence in 2007, 2008, there's a lot of violence in cities, so most people also went back to the countryside. They had lost their jobs, and then they had begun to do, try to see if they can survive there. Now, hardly 10 years later, COVID comes on and has even, strengthened the idea that people need to think about other alternatives instead of thinking that life can only be nice in the cities.
You're seeing perhaps a silver lining, an unexpected change in social dynamics, in economic behaviour from the COVID-19 pandemic that you've welcomed.
Very much. Like they say, there's a silver lining in every cloud, and nobody knew that, there are some positive things that, would come out of the pandemic. We didn't expect it came, and I think we should take advantage of it.
Chris Macaulay there from World Neighbours, ending that report from Vivian Nunes. In the UK, there has been for several years a debate about the lack of diversity in the senior levels of British businesses. There has been progress. There are more women and ethnic minority executives than there were a few years ago. But one group of people are notable by their almost total absence, according to the organisation 10,000 Black Interns. It is trying to place that number of young black men and women into British companies over the next 5 years, in the hope that will give them a better chance of landing a top job. One person who's taken advantage of the scheme is Sumaya Hassan. She had an internship at First Sentier Bank.
A lot of us have work experience, but it's random. It could be in retail, it could be in admin, but it generally does not really have transferable skills for, say, any industry that you need to go into. So what this program has given me is actually finance experience to go do what I need to do, and I don't, need to so much rely on the old experiences that I have.
Well, I've been talking to Esther Odejimi Uzokwe, the programme director at 10,000 Black Interns, and she's been telling me about the barriers many black people face when they apply to work for some of the biggest organisations in Britain's financial district, the City of London.
One of our co-founders wanted to host a dinner for black investment managers in the City of London around about this time last year, and he quickly realised that there just aren't very many of them. So that actually coincided with the murder of George Floyd as well, and the time felt right and absolutely was right to do something tangible about this chronic underrepresentation of black people in industry. And the premise was quite simple, actually, to approach 100 investment management firms and get them to pledge one internship to a black student who is studying at any UK university.
What are the main reasons then for the lack of senior black leaders in particularly in the financial district in the UK, the City of London?
Well, there are a number of reasons. So it's not that black students don't apply, for example, but we know that there are many issues with regards to people look for themselves in people that they are hiring. And that is part of the human condition. And if 100% of those that are hiring, or the vast majority of those that are hiring, do not look like me or my fellow black counterparts, then that's going to manifest itself in who is receiving access to these particular industries. There's also an element of elitism in some industries. They're looking at people from specific universities, specific institutions, and we know that a lot of this underrepresentation plays itself out in the educational space as well. And then you have the issue of actual culture and retention, because it's one thing to hire somebody at the junior level and it's another thing to keep them.
So when you speak to people in HR departments or executives at several of these 700 firms that you've been talking to, and you point this out to them, What is their response?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of acknowledgement. It would be an interesting conversation to be sat down with a number of these, HR managers, execs, partners, and for them to not acknowledge that there is an issue, knowing fully well that everybody on their board is white, everybody on their investment floor is white. If you're lucky, there are a few Asians, and that's another thing. I think part of the conversations have been kind of exposing the fact that BAME is no longer helpful, Black and minority ethnic group, in terms of measuring the diversity success of your firm. And a number of firms kind of put their numbers and their stats out there and say, yeah, we're doing well, we have X% of our workforce representing the BAME community, and then when you take the Black out of that, we're back to zero.
Right, so they knew there was a problem, but they just didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to encourage Black applicants or to hire Black applicants.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that. And, some of them will say that, they've put in their best efforts, and a lot of them have. It's just about putting that candidate pool directly in front of a lot of these firms. And many of them may struggle to attract the Black talent in the first place because maybe they're just not in tune.
You've said that there is the problem of elitism, that a lot of managers essentially recruit in their own image. But what you haven't said is that there is racism. Or do you genuinely think there is not racism in an awful lot of these companies?
I mean, I think in 2021, I am far beyond the discussion of whether or not there is racism in these things. I mean, that's a given. And what we are doing is trying to combat the ramifications of that.
Is that kind of job done? Or are there barriers they also face once they're through the door?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's part of the programme. We've embedded a very holistic support structure in the form of pre-internship training, mentorship whilst the candidates are within the firms to face a lot of to help them face a lot of the barriers that they may come across. And part of the programme is exposing the candidates to this, having candid conversations, even things like, how can I wear my hair such that people will not give me that weird look or think that I'm unprofessional. Those kinds of conversations that we're having with the candidates and letting them know that, look, you can show up as yourself.
Now, part of the spark, you said, behind the organisation was the Black Lives Matter movement after the killing of George Floyd. How confident are you that what companies are telling you now does represent some kind of permanent shift in their hiring behaviour and attitude? Or are you concerned that maybe something that they focus on for a time, but then their attention shifts away to other issues?
Yeah, look, time will tell. But one thing I would definitely say is that I'm hugely encouraged. I'm hugely encouraged by the conversations I'm having with senior execs within these firms. The aim is that it will pay dividends in the future of industry because we're looking at junior talent here. These are interns. The idea is that over the course of the next few years and even decades, we're looking at those who are going to become the decision makers across industry.
That was Esther Odejime Uzokwe there, the programme director at 10,000 Black Interns. Well, that is it for this edition of World Business Report. Bye-bye.
The Americans are out, the Taliban in. A generation's work, the dreams of so many shattered in days.
As we speak, there's Taliban right at my doorstep.
I can't believe the world abandoned Afghanistan. Our friends are going to get killed. They're going to kill us.
In our new podcast, you'll hear from people whose lives have shaped Afghanistan, who wished for and worked for different futures.
I think the biggest mistake that we made as Afghans was to feel that there was somebody else who will take care of everything for us.
A Wish for Afghanistan from the BBC World Service.
Everyone else has the luxury to pack and go. We can't. And we did not create this mess on our own.
Search for A Wish for Afghanistan with me, Lise Doucette, wherever you get your podcasts.
Sometimes directions can create leaders, not just followers. If you want to know the right way, ask someone who's already been on that journey. The EY and Microsoft Tech Directions podcast combines our knowledge to find the direct route to the summit on ideas for leadership around digital and tech. In each episode, we explore the subjects that matter to help you find your way to a better working world. The EY and Microsoft Tech Directions podcast is out now. Download today from wherever you get your podcasts, and you're on your way to the top.